everybody. Thought I'd start the show with the music today. Did that throw you off? Did that mess with you? Should I not have done that? Sorry about that. Awesome guests joining me today. It's Friday, so it's a Finnegan Fridays with Christian Finnegan. Great conversation with cultural critic and stand-up comedian Christian Finnegan. And I also asked the president of Brady United, which is a gun safety, anti-gun violence nonprofit, who was at the White House yesterday for the historic signing of executive orders by Joe Biden, to join us and to join our hangout. And guess what she did? Last night, Chris Brown stopped by the stand-up with Pete Dominic community hangout, over 50 subscribers there. You should be one of them if you haven't signed up for a paid subscription yet. What are you waiting for? We had a great time, great conversation with Kris. Listeners got to ask questions, and then we had a great conversation before and after, as we always do on Thursdays at 8. Thank you to those of you who joined me. If you haven't, sign up now. And because we went late, because Thursdays are late because of that in general, no news segment for the top of today's show. Makes my life so much easier. I'm sorry that I didn't get that done today. I'll try to do it most Fridays and pretty much every Monday through Thursday. But sometimes just one-man band that I'm playing, just can't get it done. Don't want to half-ass it. So I'll just throw right to my conversation with Chris Brown last night. As you may or may not have heard, yesterday at the White House, Joe Biden signed several executive orders that deal with gun violence, and Chris Brown and many other activists and organizers were there for it, and she told us about that and what it means and more. She's on Twitter, by the way, at ChrisB_Brown, Chris with a K, at Brady Buzz on Twitter, BradyUnited.org. Here now, the president of Brady United in front of a live group of stand-up subscribers last night, Chris Brown. There's Kris. Hi, Kris. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and I've been talking about you, and we are very excited and honored to have you joining us tonight. There's 53 people here, and I'm so psyched that you could join us, Kris.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna jump right into our conversation, and I've told everybody about you, and everybody. There's links on the show notes to talking with Kris. I'm going to air this on tomorrow's podcast, and we'll try to get to a couple questions. Put some questions in the chat, and I'll try to bring it to you. But Kris, you were at the White House today, it seems. Yes,
I was in the Rose Garden.
Somebody just said before we started, it seemed like they had a lot of activists at the event today. Who was there? From what backgrounds and organizations and movements were the activists that were there today?
Gabby Giffords was there. Of course, she was shot when she was doing a constituent services event about 6 years ago. Looking great. Fred Guttenberg was there. His daughter, Jamie, was killed at Parkland in 2018. The Bardens were there. Mark Barden and his wife, who lost their son, Daniel, at Sandy Hook Promise. Erica Ford was there. She does violence intervention work and has for many years in New York. Greg Jackson, also a victim of gun violence, who's the executive director of the Community Justice Action Fund. A young woman who's a sophomore at Howard University who founded the March for Our Lives chapter there earlier this year and is working really hard to expand March for Our Lives at HBCUs across the country. A whole host of, you're right, activists, and we have a lot of them in the United States because we have an epidemic. But it was amazing to be together and to celebrate something so momentous.
So you and so many other people are really celebrating this like it's a big deal. I guess I'm kind of surprised, but that's because I didn't understand, what it meant and how it's possible. Obviously, big laws need to go through Congress. These are executive orders by President Biden. Why is it such a big deal that what happened today?
Because, well, first of all, one of the things that I think was really important is hearing this president say that gun violence is a public health epidemic, and this is a first in a series of steps he understands needs to be taken. He's not saying that these are a substitute for congressional action. In fact, he said that the House of Representatives passed H.R. 8 and 1446, two bills. Pete, I talked to you about those before, to expand the Brady background check system, and that they should also take action to end the immunity of the gun industry. So it's very clear about what needed to happen legislatively. But the fixes that he's putting in place now attack NRA backroom deals that have been in effect in some cases for 2 decades that stop, for example, ATF from issuing a report telling us who the worst gun dealers are that are driving crime guns and what the trafficking is. The ATF hasn't released that report for 2 decades. And understanding that really helps us attack community gun violence. The homicide rates in some cities are really spiking. So that's absolutely critically important. The model legislation that he's putting forward for extreme risk laws, that's really important too. We have 19 states that have adopted them and the District of Columbia. But the reality is we need to incent more states to do that. That's the single best law so far from the studies to reduce the incidence of suicide by gun. And remember, of the 40,000 people who are killed annually by gun violence, 2/3 of those are suicide. So when I look at the 6 executive orders nominating my friend David Chipman to be the head of ATF.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about him. Well, that seemed to also be who is this guy and why is everybody making such a big deal of him? I learned today ATF has not had a confirmed nominee forever, basically, because Republicans hate they just don't like the ATF, especially the F part, I think. I think they like the A and the T. And those can be a double entendre there, because those are the kind of guys that are like beers and girls T-shirts and shit. But the F stands for firearms. Who is this guy, and why is this such a significant nomination or appointment? Because
you're right, Pete. There hasn't been an acting director. There hasn't been a confirmed director of the ATF since 2015. And before that, the prior confirmed director was something like in 2003. So this agency is a favorite punching bag for, you're right, many members of Congress. But its importance for our issue is huge because they're the entity that regulates gun dealers. And so because of lack of funding, because of lack of oversight, because of lack of leadership, the average gun dealer in this country, and keep in mind, we have more gun dealers than Starbucks and McDonald's combined, right? It's inspected once every 5 to 7 years. Once every 5 to 7 years. That's it. Dave Chipman was an ATF agent for 2 decades, more than 2 decades. He was on an elite task force that the ATF put together. He helped the International Associations of Chiefs of Police review and form some of their firearm policy. And he's been active as a gun owner and law enforcement member in the gun violence prevention movement for years and years. So he knows both sides of the equation. And I think he's the kind of voice that everyday agents in ATF who are on the front lines of this really crucial work need to finally give teeth to this agency. Just one point of fact, the NRA has used that agency through appropriations riders to put restrictions on what the ATF can do. One of those restrictions is that they cannot digitize any of their information. They have warehouses where the floors have actually just fallen through. This is and why you need real leadership in the agency to transform it. That is a wild thing to learn, that just to slow roll something, that they just have files and files of actual hard copies of files that are so dense and heavy. They are, I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy. And we sue them quite a bit because we do have a little bit of a cottage industry in suing gun dealers who are doing the absolute wrong thing. We have to work with ATF around that. And then we have to go to court and say they're not producing materials quickly enough. So we know chapter and verse. And when we first heard, but we don't have any of this digitally, we have to go to this warehouse. And I'm laughing, but it's terrible. Yeah, no, and so that's one of the things that you have to, I think. What is a ghost gun, and what was done about ghost guns and braces through executive order? Another term I did not know today. Yeah. So ghost guns are kits They're gun kits, basically, is the way you should think about it. It's like if you're buying a child's toy and it comes in a box, and often it's more complicated than these guns are. Usually they're sold in 4 or 5 pieces with instructions, and it takes 15, 20 minutes to assemble, and you have a fully finished, usable firearm. What's the problem with that? They're not regulated as firearms right now because of a glitch in the law. And so the executive order that was set forward today would regulate these kits in the same way that firearms are, require them to be serialized. Right now they're not, and require people who purchase them to go through background checks. Hugely important because the proliferation of ghost guns has risen dramatically across the country, and they're available on sites like armslist.com, at gun shows, and really creating huge holes in the infrastructure of the Brady background check system. And then the other regulation was really targeted at certain kinds of devices that can be used to transform a handgun into something closer to semi-automatic firearm. And this was the kind of device that was used actually in the shooting in Colorado. The ATF had proposed to regulate these kinds of devices in the Trump administration, and we're close to finalizing that, and then reversed course. So this is taking that back up again and really trying to ensure that those are not easily used as a disability device, is how they're marketed, to create a much more lethal kind of firearm.
I have a couple more questions for you, but I know I just have a couple more minutes. Is anybody joining us here tonight? There's 51 folks here from the stand-up community want to ask a question to our very prestigious guest, who is at the White House today to be there as part of the ceremony, the signing ceremony. And we heard some very interesting, or, what was the word you would describe, Kris, to talk about Joe Biden's rhetoric, because as you mentioned, it matters to hear the president say certain things. I was going to call it brave, but it's important and unique, and we just haven't heard. Why does it matter that he is saying these things, the president? Because
gun violence is a uniquely American epidemic, and having met so many people, I fortunately have not personally experienced gun violence, but I have friends who are teaching at Virginia Tech, next to where the shooting happened. I'm now very close friends with many parents who've lost their children after sending them to school, and far too many friends who grew up in neighborhoods where gun violence was an everyday thing. And for years, we had someone in office who would just ignore the reality of the toll that this is taking and the impact on our movement and on everyday Americans who are being asked to withstand trauma. Real trauma is agonizing, and having a president who understands that and is empathic and wants to do the right thing is healing. And I'm very close friends with Fred Guttenberg. I was sitting next to him when President Biden mentioned Jamie, and he burst into tears. And it was overwhelming to witness. This man has been conscripted into a movement he never should be a part of as a leader, and having the president of the United States understand his pain and do something to solve it is very important. Very important.
He is the father. Jamie was killed in Parkland. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Student at MSD in Parkland. Yeah.
Any questions for Kris? Anybody want to jump in here? I don't have any organized way that I decided. Let me yell at my fake producer. Keith, why didn't you come up with a way? Sorry about that. We should have been more organized here. Who wants to jump in and ask Kris a question before we let her go? Nick D. Fabrizio, the great Nick. He's a lawyer, very smart guy. Go ahead, Nick. You are on with Keith. Shut up. I'm so sorry. I had to scold. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, you guys do a great job, and thank you so much for all that you do. It's wonderful. If you had to look at state laws, which states have the most effective gun laws, in your opinion? And is there a direct correlation between those gun laws and an overall the gun violence level and murder level in those states? I think there is, but I've had arguments over that.
And let me just jump in there and say, as I said in my first conversation with Kris, this is so important. People always say nothing ever happens after a violent gun that makes headlines. And the truth is that states have been passing laws in a number of places. So something does happen. Activists have gotten a lot of work done, as if Kris' organization. Sorry, Kris, your answer?
Oh, great point, Pete. And that is really important. And so, Nick, I would point to California. California has among the strongest gun laws in the country. And they really started shaping the changes about 20 years ago. So they have a longer track record than some other states. If you look at the death and injury rate from guns in California compared to the rest of the United States, what you find is that California has increased all over the country. We've seen an increase, but they have not seen a proportionate increase compared to the rest of the country. In other words, the combination of those laws, all things being equal, has drastically decreased certain kinds of gun violence, particularly for a long time, homicide. So what we find is the states that have the lowest rates of gun violence, if you look at the laws that really work, it's two main things that states can do. One, expand the Brady background check system. Now, obviously, we advocate for that to happen at the federal level because we live in mostly contiguous states. Right. But still, a state doing that can make a difference. The other is permitting, having a local permitting system where before you're able to complete the purchase of a gun, you have to go through basic training, and the police or the law enforcement agencies or the bureaus that are administering that permit can have a dialogue and discussion with the person before the permit is issued. Daniel Webster, who's an amazing gun violence researcher out of Johns Hopkins, has examined state laws and found that the states that combine those two have the best reduction in gun violence across the country and have the lowest rates.
Great question, Nick. And I'm looking in the chat, Kris, where Tom Reese writes, this is horrific. He writes, I've lost both my mother and father to gun violence. As a former military service member, I'm not new to firearms, and I'm so confused why so many people oppose gun regulation. I want the government to make me and anyone else to jump through as many hoops as possible to attain a firearm. I don't know, maybe I'm weird. Tom, where are you? Thank you for that question. Terribly sorry to hear of that you lost your parents in that way. Hope you don't mind me reading your question to Kris. Kris, what would you say to that?
Well, first of all, Tom, I'm so terribly sorry. That's just so painful to hear. And, you're not alone, either in your experience, nor as a veteran, someone who thinks how you do. We have a program at Brady called End Family Fire. We're trying to reposition for gun owners the role of guns in the home, really think through safe storage. And we did a survey of members of the military to determine their feelings about guns and, how can we communicate better to that constituency? Because on average, 20 veterans a day are ending their life due to suicide. So this is a major issue, mostly with guns. What we found is in the veteran community, much higher than other populations, there's strong support for really basic and even more extreme, sort of from that perspective, gun laws, because in the military, people are trained to go through all of the safety protocols and procedures, right? And they've put themselves in harm's way defending our freedoms, but they don't want people who don't have the same kind of respect for guns or who are potentially dangerous to have easy access. I mean, it's amazing. And so that's a very important constituency that Brady is really trying to lift up.
Tom, thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Quickly, I'm already over time. Danny Mack, you had a question for Kris Brown. Dan? Yeah,
quick question. I am not a lawyer or a very smart person like Nick is.
But you do look like you have a bun in your hair. Do you have are you a snort? Are you a Dr. Seuss character? What is?
Nope. It is a samurai pony.
Oh, I stand corrected. I'm sorry. I did not recognize that. Yeah, go ahead with your question. I'm sorry I even
said question. No problem. So when President Biden had mentioned, that gun violence is an epidemic, my mind went straight to, hey, hopefully this is a signal to, reinstate the funding for studying, getting data able to analyze, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't have, funding was stopped to be able to analyze a lot of gun violence and mortality around the country, correct? So potentially that may be a signal to get it reinstated.
That's right, 100%. Studying gun violence as a public health epidemic was basically stopped for 20 years by a rider put in by a Republican congressman from Arkansas at the NRA's behest. The CDC had previously, with all other public health epidemics, researched gun violence. They stopped doing it for 2 decades. For the first time in 20 years, we got $25 million in the last budget, split between CDC and NIH. And we're looking for a lot more. And I took his language today exactly as you did. We need much more funding. And I think that's going to come, that will come to fruition for sure.
Kris, I won't take one more minute of your time. Actually, I will. I'll take 1 minute thanking you. And everybody here is going to, because Zoom, as a comedian, I hate that the audio, it cancels each other out. So even though there's like over 50 people here, it won't sound like that if they all applaud. So I like on Zooms to thank you for working, for joining us tonight, and your entire organization for the very difficult work. I don't know how you go to work dealing with this issue every day, advocating against anti-violence. Everybody put your hands together in front of your camera or hold your drink up. Yes, Megan. Thank you very much, Kris, for joining us. I really appreciate it. So great to have you.
Really appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, Kris.
Good night, Pete.
All right. Kris Brown of Brady. That was awesome. She was at the White House today. Very cool. We're a big deal. We're a big deal. This is a big deal show. Yeah, that was awesome and great of Kris to join us in short notice. Who would you like to hear on the show? As always, email me. My email is standupwithpete@gmail.com. Also, I'm running low on vitamin N pictures. If you are getting outside, which I insist and hope that you are, please send me your pictures. No human, no man-made products in the pictures, if possible. That's the only rule. Anything. A flower in the woods, a river, a stream, sunset, the moon, anything, send them my way. #vitamin N. I share them every day in the daily email that subscribers get. So send me your vitamin N shots. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, now every Friday I reach out to my good friend Christian Finnegan, who is a brilliant guy. I always want to know what he's thinking and how he's thinking about it. Today we talked a lot about sexism, specifically in the comedy world and in America, and some other just kind of more evergreen issues about culture and behavior, which I always love to talk with Christian about anything. And then we got to some of the current events and the issues of the week. Always a great conversation with Christian Finnegan, who's on Twitter @ChristFinnegan, also doing live dates as well, starting to come out as a lot of live performers are. Go to KristianFinnegan.com. I think he and I are going to have to come to your city and perform at some point soon, and I'm really looking forward to that. The Stand Up and Be Dominant Comedy Tour. J.L. Govan, Christian Finnegan, who else? You tell me. All right, so let's do it. My conversation with Christian Finnegan. #Finnegan Friday. All right, there he is, Christian Finnegan. It's Finnegan Fridays. I'm very happy that you're here. I'm sorry I missed you last week, but it was your birthday.
It was, in fact, my birthday last week. Yes.
How do you
I turned 28.
How do you feel about congratulations, celebrating your birthday in general? And how did you feel, for example, when I tweeted, "Hey, happy birthday," because sometimes people get squirrely about people knowing it's their birthday. But I don't care. I really don't care. I wish that I had
know. Huh?
I like when everybody knows. I like the attention.
I don't mind when people know. Sometimes it feels like a bit of work, especially with social media, that like when you have, I always say that like birthdays are a great enema for your Facebook wall, because just any crap that was on, your Facebook wall just gets pushed down with happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday.
That's perfect.
But it does. Sometimes it feels like, I've got to respond to, millions and millions of fans.
That makes you feel anxious. I totally get that. Yeah.
But I don't really have hangups about my birthday. I like to have a nice birthday. I don't expect a ton of, attention or whatever, but I always like to have a good birthday. And when I'm not saying like mind blowing, but I just said to my wife, just be nice to me today. Just be nice. And it mostly worked out.
Do you keep a kill list of people close to you that should remember your birthday and don't?
Well, I will say that I wouldn't say I take it personally, but I note it when people who should remember my birthday don't, because my birthday is on April Fool's Day. It's a holiday. And so it's not a hard birthday to remember, at a certain point, like if you're a family member of mine or like a close friend, somebody's going to bring up April Fool's Day. And in my mind, like if your birthday was Christmas,
my birthday is Halloween.
Is it?
Yes.
Oh, well, now I won't forget that. I'm going to totally prove myself wrong by forgetting it next time.
You'll never be on my list of people who should remember my birthday.
Yes, that is true. It's a limit. It's a small list. But
mine is more unforgivable because how can you forget it? Your childhood memories are associated with this also being my birthday, and I find it unforgivable for those who are close.
Like siblings, I mean.
Yeah, siblings and close friends. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get that. But I don't. A simple, my stepbrother, my ex-stepbrother, who was, I think I told you we were friends in high school when our parents got married. Like he'll just send me a text like, "Fuck you, it's your birthday," and that's enough. That's enough.
He's thinking of it. Yeah.
Typical dude, like you have to mix with some sort of insult, just like "I hate you, happy birthday."
I think the best text birthday. I love Bitmoji. You do that?
The animation I have used it, but I'm not a user on a regular basis.
Sorry, but it makes me laugh really hard.
These are the personalized.
Yeah, it's like the animated version of me. And I like to have a magical birthday, and it's like me on a unicorn with a rainbow. I like that one. I think it's fun.
Oh, nice.
Yep. But do you have any routines? Anything that you do? Do you a retrospective? New commitments, resolutions? Anything? Does any of that matter?
That noise.
Okay.
No, I've never been good about that. I've constantly tried to become that kind of person who's like, I'm gonna make a plan, and that was so hilarious about 2020. 2020 was going to be my year to really like achieve things and plan and
the pandemic,
be proactive about my life. But I'm not naturally that kind of person.
On my birthday every year, I climb one of the Adirondacks high peaks.
Do you really?
Nope. I've never climbed any of them.
It sort of seems like something I could see you doing. I can absolutely see you out there.
I knew you'd buy it, and I appreciate that you did, and I feel good about it.
In your little Scully doing one of those hand over head selfies on top of a mountain. Like I could totally see you doing that.
In a tightish Patagonia jacket.
Yeah, tightish. Yeah, I get that.
An awesome knife that never gets unsheathed.
I remember the best birthday I had in terms of consistency is I had a friend. I still have a friend who worked for SNL, and every once in a while he would get access to Lorne Michaels' Knicks seats, which were not courtside, but like 5 rows back.
Sure, awesome.
Yeah, and so he got us in to see a Knicks game, and then we went straight from there to have like dinner with friends, like at Virgil's barbecue in Times Square, and had a nice big barbecue dinner. And then I went home, and the Game of Thrones premiere was that night, and it was just like bam, bam. Now that is a fucking class ass birthday. That's about as much as I expect.
I like that. I like that a lot. That is certainly.
I'm sure there was a point in my life where there would have been like sex involved, but not now. Really.
Sex involved, you get sex
like in my concept of an ideal birthday. I
don't think I've ever had sex as like kind of a reward. Like my wife's never been like, I'm really proud of you for achieving this. Here it is. And then no other woman either. I don't.
In fact, I usually get as a consolation for my failures. That's not true. That's not true either.
Well, then you should be having sex all the damn time.
Oh my God. Constantly getting.
Why? By the way, speaking of not failures, it looks like you're back to traditional stand-up comedy. What's going on? What's happening with live performance in New York and worldwide, do you think?
I have my first indoor show tonight. It will be my first indoor show since last year. I mean, I've been doing rooftop shows and things like that. Theoretically, I should be waiting until Saturday. Saturday is my 2 weeks out from my second shot. And that's when I kind of told myself I was going to do indoor shows again. Sorry.
Oh my God, I've been holding back a sneeze. I'm going to leave that in. I've been holding back a sneeze for the last 3 minutes. I keep doing it because I think it stops it, and then you sneeze.
Because I'm going to get
wow, that's
usually
weird.
at least 2. Oh. Looks like I got the COVID after all.
So you got your next vaccination coming up when?
No, I had my vaccination 2 weeks ago, but they say that it doesn't fully take until 2 weeks after your second shot.
Got it. Okay.
That's so which would be this Saturday for me. But there is a memorial show that I'm doing tonight for a doorman, the security at Eastville Comedy Club. This guy named Dan Foote, who is just a really just sweet guy and a great photographer, and suddenly passed away last week. And so they're doing a memorial show for him tonight. And so I'm honored to be a part of that. But yeah, not really interesting. But
one of the few good things about the comedy community, I think, is when someone passes, whether they're a comedian or tangentially related to it, people, come together and look. I think that's There's a lot probably true of most communities or whatever I'm saying. I shouldn't give
there's
comedy
a lot
credit,
to not like about the comedy.
I don't
business
like
the comedy.
I've grown out of it to say maybe you would like it if you're a different person. You're young. I get it, but I've kind of
I get it, and I most of the critiques are valid. But there are some great things about it, and there are some. There is a camaraderie. You might call it a boys club or a club, and those are all true, a clique, but if you are involved in these clubs, there is a camaraderie and a support system there that I don't see in other types of artistic communities.
What about, I'm glad we're talking about this because I was just talking to a college course, zooming in and just talking about their radio broadcasting class, and young girl asked me about being a stand-up comedian, and I was just like, it's such a different thing for women. And I just want to ask you about sexism in comedy, because I think it's really interesting and important, and certainly I think the kind of in its most raw form in the entertainment business, but especially in comedy, because you go to a comedy club on the road or in a city, and there's no HR, and there are really no consequences. And to get ahead, you have to be a kind person. Much less we can talk about sexual acts that are asked or performed. But what do you think of the state of sexism in comedy now, much less as we came up?
Well, it's funny. I actually felt like it had gotten
too. It's a good question for women too, but I do want to get your perspective on that.
I had actually thought that it had been getting better in the last few years, and maybe that was just maybe I was mistaken in that sense. But it felt like a lot of the clubs had started to work more women into the lineups than certainly when I was younger, and there were certain clubs in New York. There are certain clubs that just flat out don't book women. They just don't. Or there's one or two, and then there's never more than one per lineup. And I felt like that had started to break down. Like some of the newer clubs that had opened up in the past decade didn't have that, hang up. But I wonder, some of the stuff that's gone on in the last year or so, especially since the pandemic, some of the sort of ugliness that has come out of the comedy community without shows to do via podcast or just via social media, ugliness. I kind of think, things were actually a little worse than I thought. I don't know if I'm being
be specific. Be specific of what you're talking about in terms of.
I always thought, or I think on some level, I thought that the battle was just to get more women on lineups and to get clubs to take them seriously and just get them stage time. And yes, that is a struggle, but I hadn't really considered some of the other things that women face in terms of, advances made on them, and unsafe, or dangerous behavior, and or the threat of dangerous behavior, or the threat of having somebody's social media following sicked on you because you said something that they didn't approve of or that they didn't agree with. And so there's all these different fronts that I maybe hadn't fully taken into account, and so much of the comedy world is kind of based on almost a hazing.
For sure. Yeah.
And not only quote unquote paying your dues, but in taking a hit, taking a slap to the face, taking it, getting your balls busted constantly. And that's a very male thing. Like I was just saying that my stepbrother and I, I'll tweet him, "Hey, fuck you. It's your birthday." That's a very guy way to interact. And I feel like there's always been this sort of unspoken rule in the comedy community that as a comic, you have to prove that you can handle it, that you can hang. But it's a very guy test. It's a very male ritual of sort of like, I'm going to see if you can handle the abuse. You know what I mean? And so setting aside the whole sexual aspect of, women getting hit on the road and things like that, there's also just a maleness to the world and that a lot of comedians like to deify, and they like to pretend that that's part of what makes comedy great. It's really not. It's not a part of what makes comedy great from an audience's perspective. They have no idea when somebody comes up on stage, they don't know that 3 people in the green room just called them gay. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't translate onto the stage. And, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say right now.
Well, you're talking about that time 3 people in the green room called you gay right before you went out to tape a special.
Well, it's not far from the truth.
Which is also another thing that is very specific, I suppose, to performance, where someone might try to get in your head on the most important night of your life.
Yes,
I think I find that unforgivable. But I don't think that's that common. But it certainly happens on a regular night too. Guys giving you a cheap shot right before you go on stage or something, and that gets stuck in your head. But I think what you're saying. It's really. I
mean, I take a lot of joy in doing that myself. So it's like I can't be too judgmental about it. I mean, I like to do it after someone's set, like after someone comes off stage. I like saying, "Hey, man, fuck you. You're funny. Fuck these people. You're funny." I ruined my own joke.
No, but, I get it. I've also received it, I think, once from you. I actually look for it. Most of the time I don't get it, which I know I haven't impressed you. But that one time I hang my hat on it. But no, I think it's also the idea of. I think we could extend this to most workplaces, but certainly it's so acute with women in comedy and people in general. There's an attack. There's about to be an attack, and the attack, I have to prepare for this attack, and it's going to be on everything about me. Anything I say and how I say it, anything I'm wearing, to the mole on my nose. For women, that's a different. I think it's often interpreted differently. It's synthesized differently. But the point is, whatever you're most insecure about, the way you look, the way you talk, the way you feel, comedians will find that and exploit it in front of everybody. You're living your nightmare.
Yeah, and again, but that's a very club comedy aspect.
But it doesn't happen at Sirius XM. It doesn't. That would never happen in corporate culture anywhere at the bank.
Yes. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I get it. There's a lot that's fun about that culture, like roast culture. Like I used to love doing roasts. They're a lot of fun,
sure.
But it doesn't have to be that way. And there are lots of comedians who are really, really solid and would be a lot more entertaining to the audience than a lot of people who do regular spots at clubs, because they can hang and bust balls in the green room. There are a lot of comics who won't hang and won't bust balls in the green room, but are going to entertain your audience way more. So sometimes I feel like comedians sort of create this mythology around the ball busting that really has nothing to do with what you're doing on stage or how the audience perceives it. But, and I feel like that can be very unfriendly towards women, that sort of mindset. It's like, oh, well, I've created this arbitrary set of rules to judge a comedian on, and they just happen to be based on my 27-year-old dude, talk about jerking off all the time mentality, And so if you don't rate high on my arbitrary set of rules, then clearly you're not a great comedian. And that can be, frustrating
What's happening now, do you think, in the world of kind of comedians and podcasting when it comes to being concerned about getting in trouble and losing whatever, your sponsors, whatever you want to call it? I refuse to say cancel.
I don't know. I don't really see that as a thing. I think that it's a fun bugaboo, but most of the comedians who claim to be upset about that, they absolutely lean into that because they know.
I asked because I was listening to Robert Kelly. I'm trying to listen to some podcasts, all types of podcasts, but certainly comedians, see if there's anything I can learn or take or lift, or amend. And I was listening to Bobby Kelly, and he had Ari Shaffir in, whose whole thing is, a lot of his brand is being as offensive as he can be.
That's always been his, and he's very good at it for what it's worth. But that's always been his thing.
So he was like doing jokes about how we can target Asians more. And things like that. Like, he was kind of, he's completely joking, but it's if you have to know him and know that everything he's doing is trying to be as offensive. And I was listening to that and I was thinking, I don't think anybody's really getting in trouble in comedy podcast land unless it comes up that they'd raped a ton of people and those people have now decided to tell on them.
Well, I think that if you marketed yourself as like Mr. Sensitive, and then that stuff comes out, then maybe you're going to suffer some consequences. But to me, the being anti-woke is such a hacky cornball brand at this point, but it's appealing to a lot of people. I mean, all the anti-woke shit it's just regurgitated political correctness arguments from the early 1990s. It's just also
anti-intellectualism, because when I heard you say anti-woke, I'm being woke is whatever that's now played out, but it's just about being curious.
But they've demonized that word into just anything of being empathetic or sensitive in any context whatsoever.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just a lame ass. It's just such a corny middle-aged
Mr.
dude
Woke over there going to get offended?
Yeah. I mean, the number of people who have called their podcast or their special, like Joe Rogan has a special called Triggered. Like, oh, come on, man. Really?
Yeah, it's like, no, I'm not going to be offended. I just don't. I don't like you.
Cornier than that.
I won't admire you in any way, and I won't like you, but I'm not offended. You can't. It's hard to offend me, but
Bill Burr, who I don't agree with Bill on a lot of things, but he's a fucking brilliant comic. He's just an unbelievably talented comedian.
Agreed. Always thought that.
And one of the things I respect about Bill is that, he says a lot of stuff that sort of ruffles, theoretically ruffles the feathers of the woke police or whatever, however you want to stereotype those people. But he doesn't lean into it. His whole point is to talk about what he wants to talk about. And if it bothers people, it bothers people. If it doesn't bother people, that's fine too. Like, he seems to have a goal with his material that isn't just based on starting fires. It's like he has things that bother him that he wants to talk about, but it's the end. His raison d'etre is not just to piss people off and to get people angry like a lot of these cornballs. And I didn't watch it, but I saw a clip of it when he was on Bill Maher a few weeks ago.
I was thinking about it as you're describing. I'll play it after we get done talking. I love the way he
resists. He doesn't resist to take that bait. Yeah, play that.
It's so great. No, it's a great one. I wanted to ask you about this. I almost feel like this might be beneath you, but I think people would like to hear us discuss it.
There's nothing beneath me, dude.
Well, I don't know if you paid attention to it. I don't know if you tweeted about it, but Greg Gutfeld's new show debuted on Fox News, and it's couched as kind of a comedy show at 11 o'clock on Fox News.
It's brutal.
And it's being brutally ridiculed for not being funny. I got my start. My first cable news hit ever was on Red Eye, and I was on that show for a long time, many times. I got to know Greg really well, and there were some really funny things about that show. Greg was often funny with his reactions, especially to things, but
well, I'm actually glad to hear you to talk to you about this, because I've really wanted to hear every comedian who chuckled along at Gutfeld account for this. Because I mean, I have a ton of friends who are on Red Eye, who are, the main regulars on Red Eye. I did a show with Sherrod Small, and Sherrod was as regular gets on that show. Jesse Joyce is a good friend of mine. Tom Shalhoub was a good friend of mine, or, pretty good friend of mine for a while. And I always assumed that Gutfeld was funny. I always assumed he was. Mm-hmm. I always thought he was an asshole, and I always thought he went for the sort of lowest common denominator, easy joke, the sort of most obvious take you can have on something. But I always thought of him as being like skilled as a guy who could deliver a line. And now I wonder, like, has he just gotten old, or did he never have those talents? Is it just the stolen valor of having professional comedians on your show every night that laugh at your dumb jokes? What is it?
That's not stolen valor as much as it is osmosis.
I'm joking. It's not stolen valor.
No, it's osmosis. He gets, if you're around a lot of funny people all the time, they force you to raise the bar, to be funny, or to learn things. So I think he probably did pick up a lot from having some great comedians on his show. One of the greatest moments of Red Eye, by the way, is Amy Schumer calling out Steven Crowder for saying that he's a comedian. He's like, I go fishing twice a year. I don't call myself a fisherman. But anyway, no, I think Greg is funny. And I think especially in his reaction to things, even like a lot of it.
I always thought of him as somebody who could return the ball.
Yeah, for sure. He can play along. He's never offended about things. He gets everything about comedy and humor. He hasn't been very funny since Trump got elected because of the targets of the jokes. And I think probably to some extent the audience that he's trying to appeal to. I think he's really lowered the bar a lot. But I mean,
now his target audience is the Fox audience of like 60 and up. Whereas I feel like Red Eye didn't get a lot of viewers, but the viewers did get were that sort of younger demo that
middle of the night. Yeah.
Company wants to get theoretically every TV station. Yeah. But I'm baffled by it. And clearly there's an arrogance to the fact that, you know, he's doing 3 different shows at Fox. And so you can tell when he's reading these jokes, if you watch the clips online, that some of them he's clearly not even read ahead of time, or
his timing's off. He's not. Yeah.
His timing is way off. He'll stop in the middle of a line and not realize that there's 2 more words on it that make the joke work or not work. And so some of that's just, you know, I wouldn't call it laziness, because obviously he works really hard, but arrogance and the idea that just like, oh yeah, we'll just throw together some comedy and that'll be fine. You know, it's not that easy. Making Dana Perino laugh on The 5 is not the same as actually writing an hour of topical comedy.
Making Jesse Waters laugh means you're doing it wrong. But what about Gutfeld attacking all of the late night comedians and like they're not funny, they're not edgy? I mean, dude, Colbert, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon.
There's just nothing to be gained from doing that. And the problem
why would he do that? Nothing to be gained. It makes it look little and petty, and I guess he wants to be their target.
It's like, you better be very confident in the strength of your material if you're going to be taking those shots.
Yes.
You know, all it does is just open you up for additional scrutiny. You know, and the main thing that conservative comedy, quote unquote, fights against is that it refuses to go after its own. You know, liberal comedy, you can talk about how, you know, Stephen Colbert is too woke, or, you know, Jimmy Kimmel cries on the air or whatever, but they will take pot shots at Democrats and liberals. Or, you know, you will see Jimmy Kimmel do a joke about like no gluten kids in LA, or, you know, you'll see, you know, Stephen Colbert make jokes about sort of, you know, urban elites. You will never see a joke about the Trump base coming from Fox. You just won't. And that,
or conservatives in general. I mean, maybe
there's no vulnerability to
Jeff Foxworthy. You know, you're a redneck when isn't he doing that?
That's as close as you've gotten. And even that was 20 years ago now, or more. Who's doing that? And I'm not even saying that was the height of comedy, but at least that had some real truth to it, you know, in the sense that it was like a person talking about his own
the blue collar comedy tour in general. Those guys did
some self-deprecation,
and talking about their own culture, but they're not. But that was I'm trying to give an example of it when it does happen, but that was such a different time than now, and there's so much to mine in the Trump years for so many different reasons, but they won't do it. They can't do it. I don't know.
That would require the audience to come down off of their individual crosses for 10 minutes to laugh at
so
themselves.
Well said.
And they can't.
Good.
They're the victims. Yep. Everyone else is attacking them.
Yep.
Period.
That's a good thing to pivot to. I wanted to actually, I wrote that down as a thing to talk to you at some point about, because I heard a lot of conversations this week. I was just listening to some podcasts. I had Jeff Charlotte, the author of The Family, on yesterday, and this victimhood of white Christians, especially conservatives, especially all this new data coming out saying they actually think they have it harder than minorities, and they're the ones being marginalized. That is very much taken hold in our culture, and I don't think that is going to dissipate. But it's so frustrating and angry. Nothing outrages me more to see people be, act like victims who aren't. In my opinion.
I mean, that has to be the animating principle, though, because they have no actual positive things they want to do.
You're really dumb.
I mean, like, what are they fighting for? They're not fighting for anything. They're literally only fighting against things.
Not even roads.
Yeah. What are the policy, proposals, the proactive, positive policy proposals on the right? There aren't any. It's all about stopping them from taking more from us. And if you've grown up your entire life that you get 7 pieces of pizza and the rest of the world gets 1, and then all of a sudden people are like, you know what? Maybe you should only get 6 pieces of pizza and the world should get 2. That's going to feel like something's being taken from you, and it doesn't take much to light that fire within you that makes you feel that you're a crusader against the wrongs being done against you. That was way too verbose.
That you're begrudged.
They're looking for a reason to feel victimized, because victimization means that the rules no longer apply to you and that you can do things that you wouldn't ordinarily be allowed to do because, well, this is war and we're being victimized. And so therefore we can, suppress the vote, and we can do these various things because we're being attacked and we have to defend ourselves. It's a permission slip to be an asshole.
Oh, God. I'm glad I always listen to the end to you.
Because it takes me about 3 minutes to find what the hell I'm trying to say.
I'd be lying if I said I don't often think about what I'm about to ask, but it's really important that you also listen to the people that you're taping a conversation with, and permission slip to be an asshole is a really great sentence, and it's worth asking what that's about and why it is. But I don't know if you saw this week. Again, back to my interview with Jeff Sharlet told me about it. There's new research out. A lot of people are talking about the insurrectionists and where they came from in terms of their socioeconomics. And a large percentage of them came from areas, communities that had been changing ethnically, demographically. And I thought that wasn't a coincidence. And I think a lot of
course not. No, I don't think anyone
sociologists don't think that.
Yeah. Obviously, you're being polite and gentle by saying I don't think that was a coincidence. It wasn't. It's not a coincidence.
I haven't read into the data. I don't even know how many people they looked at. So.
The economic anxiety thing, I think we all knew that, like, oh, wow, you mean all these people that flew across the country and paid for hotel rooms in Washington, D.C. for 2 nights? You mean they weren't actually suffering economic anxiety? Clearly these are not the poor of the poor.
So a lot of them took the bus. It was organized.
I think it was Chris Hayes who was saying during the campaign, that the boaters, those boat flotillas for Trump really were the Trump base, the archetypal Trump base, that these are not poor people. These are people who still fashion themselves intellectually as sort of like the working class, but own fucking boats. That's really who that.
So how do you get around that? How does that change in our culture? How did the whites get there, and how do we get them out?
I mean, how did they get there? I mean, generation upon generation upon a generation of
having
setting the rules to benefit you.
Fair enough.
And if you allow me to set the parameters of every legal situation, I would try to make sure that everyone got a fair shake, but I damn well sure I'm going to make sure I get a fair shake. You know what I mean? It's like, I might theoretically in general want you to have opportunity and people from other cultures, but for damn sure that I'm going to get my opportunities. I'm going to take care of myself at the end of the day. And so if you look at sort of a macro version of that, it's not unnatural, and I'm not even saying it's evil. It's completely rational and understandable that the people who are sort of setting the parameters are going to set parameters in ways that benefit them.
Self-interest.
Yeah. I mean, and what you're seeing now is you're seeing groups of people as they become demographically larger portions of the country start to want to give themselves that same treatment. And honestly, they're being much more genteel about it than white people.
Let me give a specific example of what you're saying. And I think just elaborate on when you do something that's in your own self-interest, you really are doing it in your own self-interest, but it also benefits probably a lot of people who are in a similar situation. If you own a business that has 50 employees and you advocate for a policy or push against a policy that would be punitive to your 50 employee owned business, and you win, so will other people who own businesses with 50 employees. And so specifically it's the least sexy thing to talk about, but it's probably the most important thing that affects change, and that's tax policy. And we're hearing a lot about it again because of how are we going to pay for infrastructure investment in this country. And I think it's a great example of what you're talking about, because our tax policy I've studied it for years and interviewed so many experts, from David K. Johnson to Bruce Bartlett to Bestie Stevenson, other economists, and it's so wildly out of whack and disproportionate and unrepresentative and fucks this country up and is the main driver of wealth inequality. I don't know how we talk about it, but I certainly would love to hear what your thoughts are about jumping out.
They're not going to be as smart as David K. Johnson. I'll tell you that. But I still don't think people understand how rich some of these people are. I don't think they fully grasp. And it's not just Jeff Bezos. It's not just the ones you've heard of. It's not Elon. It is Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but it's not just them.
No, it's people in my community, for sure.
And I'm sorry?
People that I live.
Yeah.
I mean, they have so many people I know have so much money, much more than they'll ever need.
I'm not even talking about them. I'm talking about that tenth of a tenth of a tenth.
You don't know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about my friends who own islands in my community. No, I know.
I didn't realize you rolled like that, as they say.
I live in.
But I think people. They don't understand that in the last year, and I'm just quoting other statistics that I've heard smarter people say, but when everyone has taken a massive hit, and if you're lucky, you haven't taken a financial hit the last year, like you were able to work from home and you kept your job and you've sort of flatlined or managed to plateau. If you've managed to financially plateau over the last year, that's a pretty sweet gig. And I know I would have signed up for that. I think a lot of people would, but I don't think people understand that the richest people in this world added $300 billion of wealth in the past year. Well, everyone else has been struggling or plateaued.
Thousands of new billionaires in 2020. I think it was thousands.
Yeah. And it's in this idea that we have in this country that any money that a rich person makes is somehow earned, as opposed to just money compounding money. And it's sort of a system of financial momentum that you get when you cross a certain financial threshold. That
your money is making more. I'll never forget hearing this. While I sleep, my money will make more money than how much you make your entire life working as a welder or even a teacher. Like your investments are making money while you're doing nothing is the best way to illustrate, I think, what you said about not earning it.
Yes. And I think if people understood, I'm sorry, I have a barking dog here. Billy, please stop. That should do it. Very effective.
If people understood.
The statistic I always find helpful is when you hear about the ratio of CEO pay to average employee pay, that, in the 1930s, or not 1930s, the Depression, obviously, but in the 1950s, when Ike was president, that the average CEO was like, their salary was 35 times higher than the average worker. Something, I don't know what the numbers are, but something like that. And now it's something like 3,000 times the average worker. And that has nothing to do with inflation. That's pure policy. There's
lobbying,
absolutely pure policy.
Yeah.
And, in my opinion, it seems very obvious to me that we could tie these things to some sort of metric that would not do anything to stop innovation. It would not do anything to stop freedom to run your country the way you want to run it. But to me, it's like, to say that a CEO's compensation or, top level executives' compensation should not be more than X times their lowest paid employee. I don't see that as a giant impingement on freedom, and it would add so much more money back into our financial coffers, because all this money that billionaires are making, it's not going into the economy. This idea of trickle down economics, it's all going into savings, or offshore accounts to just compound and compound and compound.
Corporations are paying the lowest tax they've ever paid in the history of America before the Trump tax cuts. So having a conversation about raising taxes is
it was at 35 until 2017, and now it's down to
and they weren't paying it though. But those who were supposed to pay 35% because that's how much money they made weren't paying it. There were ways to get around it, as you just mentioned.
If you just took the money that corporations spend on lawyers to dodge taxes, if we just got that money, we'd be in better financial
great
shape.
Point. And I hate to end our conversation, but I have to get Julie to the orthodontist.
Do it.
And thank you so much for all of your time today. I love talking to you. Have a great weekend. And we all love Christian Finnegan. Thank you very much, buddy.
I love Peter Dominic. Bye.
Okay, there he goes. Finnegan Fridays, Christian Finnegan at Christ Finnegan. It never gets old to thank the guests that you just listened to on Twitter, especially. They almost always see it and appreciate it and like it. So please go on to Twitter and say, I always love your conversations with Pete. I'll see it and like it as well. At Christ Finnegan, everybody, and go say hello to him. That's it for today and for this week. I'll look for you over the weekend on the social medias, on the Discord platform. If you're a stand-up subscriber, you can get access to that, where you're never alone if you're a stand-up and Pete Dominic subscriber. Thank you so much for listening this week, for your support, and let me know who you'd like to hear next week, and I'll reach out to those people. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Any ideas, any advice, anything that you want to send over my way, your vitamin N pictures. Let's do it. Get it done. Have a great weekend. Thank you. I love you. And here is today's show ender, as we just talked about Bill Maher with Bill Burr. And it doesn't quite go the way that Bill Maher, I think, thought it would. I love this clip, too.
You're a good actor. I didn't realize that, but you really can do it.
Thank you.
No, we've never met, and I've always enjoyed you. I think you're a great comic, but I thought tonight maybe we would sort of share a cry together, because I think we have something in common, which is that we think political correctness may be ruining comedy, or at least threatening it. Because I know you've had your problems with that, and you did a routine recently about how women like it rough, and then, of course, the internet police got all over you.
Well, I gotta be honest with you, I didn't notice if that happened, because I don't pay attention to it. I don't read comments.
Happened. Yeah, they hated you.
Yeah, but who did?
The haters.
This is my thing. Who? Like 20 people? Like 20 people with a hashtag can get like a news story going now, and I just don't think. There's no problem. Like the amount of times somebody tells a joke and they'll say that there's a controversy at a comedy club. That's funny is they'll show the clip on the news and you hear the crowd laughing. So the comic is basically guilty of telling a joke that worked.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then if you put it on the news, it's going to be a completely different context. But I mean, I don't go on stage and worry about what people are thinking. I mean, if you can choose to take a comedian seriously, but that doesn't mean that I now meant the joke, and you can start saying that there's statements,
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Yeah. But I mean, you're not the first comedian to undergo that. I mean, Chris Rock says he won't play colleges anymore because they're too politically correct. Daniel.
You just ignore them. It's like 3 days. They flip out for 3 days. They try to bully you into an apology.
Well, you can't ignore them when they're right in the audience and you're playing to them.
You tell them to shut the fuck up.
Yeah, believe me.
It's a comedy show. That's all you do. It's like,
sweetheart, I do it here every week.
It's
you don't have to tell me.
Manufactured strategic outrage. Right. Like I had somebody recently try to say that I did a rape joke. Because they wanted to make a point about it.
Bringing up.
Okay,
yes.
But I didn't. I used the word rape. But if you use the word rape, that doesn't mean you're doing a rape joke. And the person basically took my act, already had their mind made up, and then they just made my jokes make their point. And
all right.
So I mean, I guess you can do that, but I mean, it doesn't mean that's what I was saying.
Well, then forget it. Let's not have a good cry together. But as long
as what you wanted out of that?
As long as we're on the subject, I'm just going to say this about it, because I have been through the same thing. I used to do a joke about Sarah Palin, and they said it was about her child, and it really wasn't. It was about how she was stupid. But But my point was, even if it was, I don't give a fuck, because here's the deal. You didn't come to my show. The people who didn't come to the show, the court does not recognize your right to comment on my show. When you perform before an audience, especially a live audience, that is your community. How many dates do you do a year?
A couple hundred.
Couple of hundred?
Yeah.
Wow, you are really on the road a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
that's another reason why I don't really offend people, because I don't have a TV show, and I don't have advertisers that you can then bully into making somebody apologize. But you also, you're on a network.
Right.
You're somebody that somebody can attach themselves to, and they can get a story going. I'm just some jackass telling a joke in a strip mall, so they're not going to waste their time getting offended by me, and I could say something way worse, air quote, way worse than you did. So it's a really weird time where people are just bringing this up all the time like this is a major problem. I'm not experiencing it. I think it's like a half a dozen stories, and like usual, they're trying to act like, the sky is falling. It isn't. It's a fun time. Come out to a comedy club. You'll have a good time. It's all a joke.
Right.